Welcome back to Simply Trade Tips. I'm Renee Chiuchiarelli. This is Julie Part, Hammer and Heels. Hi, Jules.
Hey, Renee.
As always, we're going to leave you with a call to action or an FIO, figure it out. So, Julie, we are in the tech series. I think we're on episode 2. What are we covering today?
Oh, we would be remiss if we didn't take a bigger picture and start with like products and how we think about products and automating trade data related to the products. And then I think we should also cover entities because it's some of that same information. What do you
Okay.
think?
I think that's awesome. Good idea. So we went a little bit over products and entities, but we're going to go, we gave some examples in episode 1, but I think we're going to get in a little more detail. So let's talk about what are products and entities in detail.
Yeah, so I think when you think about tech and how you manage trade data for products and trade data for entities is what we're talking about. We want the ability to gather information ahead of time and spend the thoughtfulness ahead of time and then store the information so that when the screaming shipment comes through, it can pick up the amazing attributes that we were thoughtful about and you right. And again, we can go through a bunch of different product type information and kind of give more information about that. But that's kind of how I think about it. I think that duty management programs, just for awareness, we'll cover that in a future episode.
Okay. So if we get into products, maybe you and I can give some examples of what products and trade data, what's the relationship?
Mhm.
So what are
So
some good examples?
yeah, so I'll start. I think I use the term trade numbering. So anything that any government agency of alphabet soup needs to give a number to your product that's different than the product ID you assign yourself, there's, I call them sub processes that happen to get the number right. And tech can manage those threads to kind of get you through a wicket and then get to the right answers to the question. It's this Schedule B number, it's this HS, it's this USML, it's this CCCN, and I think we can use tech to do that. Renee, what's another example?
Managing PGA, I talked a little bit about that in our first episode. So, I mean, I think there's 40 plus partner government agencies, or as we used to call them, other government agencies. So it can manage the data so that your broker, we're giving our broker data, our customs broker data, or our freight forwarder for exports. And so in this case of PGA, we can manage the data up front with tech, know what we need, know what triggers are going to be happening as we're bringing products in. So that's one other product attribute.
Yeah. I'm also thinking like country of origin, right? Especially now, like non-preferential origin never mattered so much because the duty rate is variable now. But there's a sub process that deals with getting the country of origin correct. And then you store it in your system and then you can use it on an entry. But the tech is about using that data using the technology to run a sub process so that you get the answer to the question well before the scary shipment comes through. What's another, what's another
So
example?
transaction value, like you said, Julie, I love your term sub process because in the background we're working with finance or pricing we were at Raytheon. So to your point, those sub processes can take place
Mhm.
with technology, and then with cross-functional collaboration, then all of a sudden we know what our value is, we're getting it correct. And so technology can help us with the sub process related to valuation.
Yeah, and one more thing that I've spent a lot of time on in products is just a word of caution around um, sometimes you don't want to put the labor to do those sub processes ahead of time. You too far ahead of time is probably a good word. You want to make sure that that's the product that's shippable and saleable, meaning it's going to be sold, it's going to be shipped. And once that's identified, then you can start your work because you know now you will manage the iterations in the engineering phase of a particular product. But sometimes if you get too soon in the process, you're creating noise in your sub processes. So there's a game that you play with trying to identify the trade related data soon enough, but not too soon. So there's different strategies around doing that. And I'll also say too that I used to be kind of neurotic about not expending labor because of inefficiency fees. But I think with some of the technology that's introduced, it's so what? Like, so you're doing it ahead of time. It really only takes 5 more minutes of somebody's time, not 3 hours like it used to. So think about that too.
Yeah, with technology, I love that. You're allowing the process or the sub process to take
Mhm.
place earlier, and people aren't
Yeah.
complaining, and it's efficient because it's
Mhm.
5 minutes versus three. That's a great point, Julie. Thank you. So
Mhm.
let's talk about entities.
Mhm.
What trade data is needed for entities more specifically?
Ooh. So I
Number
think
one.
right. So when we talk about entities, and again, the entities, if they just sit in your system and they're not generally attributed to a sales order or purchase order, they're just entities. So you do want to move to that sales order or purchase order level, or know what entities are going to be bought from and sold to. But the idea is that you want to run those entities through screening. Make sure that they're screened ahead of time. And again, screening needs to happen multiple times because people and entities can get unfavorable throughout the entirety of the process. So it's important that you kind of rescreen, but also kind of looking at sanctions, right? When contracts come in, are these entities, um, do we need to review them from that perspective? But I think there's more examples, Renee. What do you got?
Well, one I really love is supply chain mapping, or, that's kind of related to forced labor.
Mhm.
Customs has increased enforcement on this over the years, although it's a very old regulation, but
Mhm.
much more enforced in the last 4 to 5 years. So, how can technology? I mean, I've seen crazy. In fact, Customs had a technology, I think, symposium, and
Good.
displayed some of the technology they're using to track products, DNA, where, so they can literally tell from soil analysis, is this product from a
Yeah.
certain region, for example, of China? So,
Mhm.
and Julie and I talked about this way in the beginning of the episode, we need to get up to speed. So supply chain mapping is another entity where you can look at what your suppliers are doing, where are they getting their raw materials, so work with them on this technology to make sure that you're getting ahead of CBP, and where your product raw materials are sourced from.
Right. I'll also say too, you can use a lot of these capabilities to determine many other due diligence questions that you would answer on a questionnaire. For example, when you talk about entities, maybe you want to know where they produce. So that should be roughly equal to your country of origin, right? On your product. So there's ways to kind of triangulate this data too. But I also think too, Renee, we spent a lot of time on related party indicators and which who's related to whom. So you can also attach those attributes to the entity as well.
I was just going to say that with the pending BIS rule, we need to know relationships and
Right.
who ownership. And so you and I had in fact, I think at our company at Raytheon, we had a software program that I had access to that talked about MAD, mergers, acquisitions, and
Right.
divestitures, which was really cool. So, but wasn't like a Excel file that we had. We were able to go into a tool, which was pretty cool. So that's
Mhm.
another way, to your point, that technology can help with
Right.
entities.
Right. Right.
So how can it? And let's just talk to summarize.
Mhm.
Technology overall with products and entities. Um, I think for me, it's the ability to process high volumes of data, you
Mhm.
know, with these products and entities, especially like if you're in Amazon, how do you do this? How do you manage this volume of data
Mhm.
efficiently and compliantly? Well, that's when we need tech, and even the small companies. I mean, just think about, like we said, what you can do from episode one. You're not going to lose your job. You can focus more on strategic decisions.
Yeah.
So, what do you think, Jewel,
I would think
overall
that's
with product and
cool.
entities?
I think with all these, like you mentioned, the you know, querying, other databases and stuff like that. It's generally a manual process to do that. So you can use tech. If you know the steps of the process in a manual environment pretty well, you can use technology to kind of automate those features and take the manual steps out. Right. We were even working on robotics processing, Renee, back in the day. Um, there's some really cool things that you can do. I think it's just getting real about understanding the data and what is causing your department churn. right? So if you know that there's product or entity information, and usually it is, just a tip, that's causing you a lot of labor, those are the things that you're probably most ripe to automate. But I think from just a key takeaway here is that technology can help by corralling and like sticking the trade data answer to the question. That sub-process worked, woohoo, right? And then you got the answer to the question. It now sticks to the entity, it sticks to the product, so that it can be used forevermore when an actual physical import or export come to play. So I think it's about efficiency, but it's about trying to build a better sub-process, but it's also about the home for the answer to the question that you can
Yeah,
pick
I
up.
love that. Like
Mhm.
yeah, so you're not just sticking it to a purchase order, you're
Right.
sticking it to the higher level product and entity, these answers.
Mhm.
Good point,
Yep.
Jewel. That's an awesome point. Because a lot of people are like, yeah, I figured this out for this transaction, this tactical transaction. What you're talking about is getting answers to products and entities at a higher level so it flows through for all the transactions.
And especially like when we talked about the government is checking, right? They know what you're bringing in, right? They're
Right.
running some data analytics to be like, this is a new tariff. This is the same tariff, but your value range is very different than it used to be. So they're doing some analytics like that. I know, especially globally, India was probably one of the leaders when it came to valuation targeting in this
Wow.
space. But in general,
Scary.
it goes back to your product information.
Yeah, good point. All right. So what's our FIO
Ooh,
for
so
our
I think we want to get a little bit more into the product and into the entity itself, and kind of write down your challenges with integrating trade answers, like the trade answer to the question, into your product or into your entity data itself, and how do you keep that marriage together so that the data can be reused.
awesome? Awesome. All right. Check out our Trade Geeks, please. Tell us if you've done our FIO, figure it out, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you, Julie.
Thanks, Renee.